Alright, a lot of you have been asking for string content for a while now, so it's finally time to give it a shot with my top 5 favorite strings. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets Runners. So in the previous video, I mentioned we would do some sort of string content soon, and I figured what better place to start than with a little roundup of my favorite strings. I think I'm going to title this video Top 5 Best Strings or something like that, you know, for a nice healthy amount of clickbait, but really this is going to be more so a video of my favorite strings, not necessarily the 5 technical best. I'll talk a little bit about my preferences and why some really good strings might not have made the list, but hopefully you enjoy, and I'll try to work more string content into my schedule this year. Now, of course, before we go on, let me remind you that any of the strings we talk about here you can check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. And please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments section what you want me to cover next. So before we get into any specific strings, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I tend to like in a string, and then some of the stuff that turns me away. Good feel, that's the #1 thing I look for in a string. You know how I feel about good feel in a racket, and it's no different with strings. If it feels super dead or mushy or muted, I'm probably not going to like it. The other thing I don't like in a string is stickiness. Now this is something I often feel when I play with a shape string. I get that sensation of stickiness when I feel like the string isn't sliding on itself very well. I also get that when I play with a multi, which is part of the reason I pretty much never play with a multi. But generally speaking, if a string is too shaped, and especially if it's soft and shaped, I get that sticky feel, which leads to an inconsistent and sometimes launchy response. I will touch on that a little bit more, kind of comparing the strings I do like with the others that I find a little bit sticky. But without further ado, let's get into number 5. Coming in at number 5, we have Toral Wasabi. Now, we recently brought in Toral strings after seeing a ton of positive feedback, and after a few months of carrying them, they've become extremely popular and with good reason. Every Toral string is good in its own right. They've really knocked it out of the park, but interestingly enough, it's Wasabi that has stuck out as my favorite of the bunch, at least from the ones I've tried. Now I say interestingly because it's one of their sharpest polys and actually quite soft compared to other shaped polys, which, considering what I just said about those exact 2 characteristics, would make you think it's probably not for me. The thing about Wasabi is that there is an undeniably more snappy and responsive feel to it that I've never really felt with something so sharp and soft. I look at something like Hyper G Soft as kind of the perfect example of a soft shaped string that has major inconsistency issues for me. You get a ton of grip on the ball because the pocketing is so long and the sharpness adds a ton of bite, but because it's so grippy, you don't get a very well-defined snapback, which makes it less consistent. The snapback on Wasabi is more along the lines of what I get on a moderately stiff round string, which is really impressive considering I still get that extra bite from the 4 sides. Basically, they've managed to combine the best of both worlds with the slicker feel you get from something round and the extra purchase you get from something shaped, which is not something I thought was possible, but it's also not without its issues. The one problem I have with Wasabi is that the feel isn't the best. Jonas from Tennis Nerd actually described it perfectly with the word plasticky. It's just a little more muted and ambiguous than some of its competition. I do think that plasticky feel is how they managed to achieve such great snapback for something so soft, but yeah, it does come at the expense of that rewarding pop you can get with some polys, especially the next one on this list. Okay, we're going from one of the most recent polys we started carrying to one of the oldest, and I just want to say, strings will come and go, hype will follow, but one string will always be king, and that's Luxilon Alo Power. Now I have Alo Power Black here, and it's very close to the silver one, but I do still think traditional silver Alo is better. There's a reason this is one of the 2 most popular strings on the Pro Tour. It's kind of magical in its playability. Spin and control are obviously great because it's round, slick, and stiff, but it's the unique Alo Power feel that makes it so special. It gives you this gorgeous poppy but still very controlled response when the ball leaves the string bed that is totally uncommon for a polyester. That sensation is what's missing on Wasabi, and while there are other polys that provide good feel, none are as effective at negating that signature poly deadness the way Alo does. A lot of strings have actually come out trying to copy Alo Power. Basically any silver string that's come out since like 2015 is an Alo clone attempt, and they can get close in terms of spin and control, but it's that intangible feel they can never seem to match. So then why isn't Alo Power ranked higher on the list? Well, that's because this string becomes absolutely, I don't know, fill in whatever word you want to put in there, but it's not good after very little time. I mean, seriously, I'm talking sometimes after less than 2 hours of play, you will feel the most significant drop off in playability ever. As soon as it's notched, sometimes even before that, the magic is gone, the spin is way less, it becomes a little launchy and wild, and it does become a little harsh on the arm. That's why you see so many pros using it. They could care less about durability, and when it's good, it's so good. But as soon as it isn't, well, you're gonna wanna cut it out right away. That's just gonna be a reality with Alo Power. There was a time where I really didn't care if I cut it out every 14 seconds, but nowadays there are so many other great strings that play well for much longer that Alo might have a little bit better top end playability, but I just can't rank it any higher. We're going to pivot here to a string that I basically ignored for the first 3 years I was at the store, but once I tried it, I could not believe how well it played. Coming in at number 3, we have Babola RPM Rough. This string kind of encompasses everything I like in a polyester, and the number one outstanding feature is just how ridiculously spin friendly it is. Now, it's not shaped, so it's not going to give you more spin in the form of extra bite and extra purchase over the ball, but it's in a complete league of its own in terms of the amount of snapback it produces. This is the slickest string I've ever tested, and that's in large part due to the rough texture. You get a ridiculous amount of string movement here. You can actually feel them moving back and forth on each other when you're hitting with spin. Compared to regular RPM Blast, it does feel like it's just a notch above in terms of spin potential, but the other thing I like more about RPM Rough compared to RPM Blast is that this has much better feel for the ball. Color is weirdly important for poly playability, and black strings have always felt very dead and muted to me. Some players will like that because that's part of what made poly so popular as control strings in the first place, but me personally, I like a slightly livelier response, even if it does come at the expense of some control. Yellow is my favorite color for RPM Rough, and the best way I can describe it compared to RPM Blast is that it's just a little bit juicier. Very weird, but that's all I've got. I know you guys like my vocabulary for describing a frames feel. We'll see if you like what I come up with for describing strings. Now, if I am going to nitpick a small issue I have with RPM Rough, it's that it does have a slightly artificially spinny feel. It's similar to the sensation I have with frames that have very open spin grommets, but there's just so much string movement here that it can be a little too much at times. I think this is why there aren't that many pros playing with RPM Rough. It does feel like it takes over from the racket a little too much at times. I've put RPM Rough into super classic rackets like the Pro Staff or the Prestige, and I do have to say it's just a little off and overly snappy in rackets like that. I'd string RPM Rough in rackets that complement that high snapback, so any spin racket, Arrow, Shift, V-Core, but also a racket like the Blade that has good classic playability, but also a decent amount of modern spin to it. I wonder why I have these two rackets with me right now. So we've made it to the top 2, and while number 1 is definitely my favorite string setup, it is a little different to the rest of these, so this is what I would call my favorite normal string. I feel like that's a pretty big hint for what number 1 is going to be, but coming in at number 2, we have Head Lynx Tour. Lynx Tour is special because I don't think it has any one outstanding feature, but it's just incredibly well-rounded with really no significant drawback. Kind of like Wasabi, it's a shaped string that doesn't have much drop-off in control or consistency. To me, it's even more slick and consistent than Wasabi, but where it's much better is in the crisp feel that it has. It's similar to Alo, where it has really well-defined feedback when the ball exits the string bed. I still wouldn't say it's as good as Alo, but it also doesn't lose playability nearly as fast. Now, this is a good time to mention Hyper-G because it's not going to make this list, but it's quite a similar string to Lynx Tour, just with a bit more bite, but also a little more sacrifice and consistency. That inconsistency is why I'm not able to get the most out of it, but for those of you who like that super bitey feel of a shaped poly, Hyper-G is probably still the best in that category. It's kind of like the Alo Power of shaped strings because it has a similarly unique pop that a lot of other strings are trying to replicate. That feel is something I always love when I play with Hyper-G, and part of the reason I like Lynx Tour so much is because I do feel like it's the string that comes closest in feel, just with a little bit more consistency. At this point, Lynx Tour is kind of my go-to playtesting string because it works well in pretty much every racket. There's nothing about its playability that's going to overpower any frame, but it also does have a little bit more grip on the ball because it is sharp, which works really well in an 1820. I also just want to say that champagne strings look great in a racket. It's not too boring, but also not too crazy. And I have this theory that the champagne color is part of what feels great because Lynx Tour, Adrenaline, Firestorm, they've all always felt great to me. So making this list wasn't too hard. Figuring out 2 through 5 required a bit of thinking, but number 1 has been my favorite string setup for years now. Natural gut in the mains, Alo Rough in the crosses. Now obviously, this is a very premium setup that comes at a very premium price, and I honestly wouldn't try it unless you're ready to spend some money. Once you try gut, it's very difficult to move away from it. The feel is unlike anything else, and paired with Alo Rough, there are very few drawbacks. You know how I just said that Alo Power and Lynx Tour have that really nice crisp pop to them? Well, take that, multiply it by 10, and you have this amazing plush but extremely responsive and connected feel of natural gut. You can feel every bit of the ball, and the best part of natural gut is it seems to complement the natural feel and flex of a frame rather than kind of wiping it out the way some polyesters can do at times. Also, because of its unique flexible characteristics, it makes the sweet spot a lot more forgiving, but still keeps the actual sweet spot extremely well defined. Playing with gut for the first time really was a transcendental experience for someone like me who places such high value on feel, and honestly, whatever technical loss in spin and control you're supposed to get, I think is pretty much negligible. That's because you have such great connection to the ball that you feel like you can manipulate it in any way you want while it's in the string bed, and if you do feel like you want more control, just string a little higher. It's never going to be an uncomfortable string. Now, it may not amplify spin in that artificial way you're going to get with RPM Rough or a really sharp string, but it's also not going to limit you in the amount of spin you can produce the way a multi would. It's basically going to respond one-to-one in terms of spin production with whatever your technique tells it to do. Just look at Federer. He played with a ton of spin and didn't need a poly to help him generate that. Now, I will say, you should pair it with a rough poly because that's the best way to marry the power and feel with the control and spin you need in the modern game. The rough texture is very important because it slides much better on the gut, and the reason I go for Alu is because it itself has such good feel that the two strings kind of complement each other very well. I've never felt that drop off in playability to be too intense with an Alu and gut hybrid, but if you're worried about that, go for 4G rough. That string was basically meant to be used in a hybrid with gut because it retains tension so well. But yeah, gut just makes for the most pure hitting experience. It obviously goes extremely well in a classic thin beam racket, but like I said, it pretty much complements any racket very well, so don't be afraid to try it in something else. So those are my top 5 favorite string setups. As you can see, the Alu and gut hybrid is in my old racket of choice, and I do think if I was to enter a match, it's what I would use. But also, if I were to lose my tennis industry discount privileges, I'm not sure I could justify it. It's a great setup, but do be careful. Don't get in over your head. I also know some poly-poly hybrids have been gaining a lot of traction with a lot of pros using them, and also some B-rate YouTubers talking about them, so I'll have to give that a shot and maybe talk about it in the future. I'm kidding, by the way. Beckett is a great YouTuber. Definitely top 50 racket reviewers living in Vancouver right now. But anyways, hopefully you enjoyed the video. I actually had a lot of fun with this. I think I will make more string content in the future. Maybe a series where I talk about a string and a racket that go particularly well together. Let me know what you think about that, but for now, that's going to be the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, and remember that if you want to test out any of these strings, you can come visit us in store, or you can check them out online at racketsandrunners.ca.